In the year 1955, a trading vessel was set to transport goods from Samoa to the adjacent island of Tokalow. However, it mysteriously vanished before reaching its intended destination. 1 month later, the partially submerged wreckage of the ship was stumbled upon, bearing evidence of a puzzling ordeal. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Among the discoveries were 4 tons of absent cargo and bloodstained bandages strewn across the deck. Yet there was no trace of any survivors, and they were never found. The fate of these passengers remains an unsolved mystery to this day. Today, we're delving into the perplexing tale of the MV Joyita's disappearance. Despite a thorough search party combing the area within 24 hours of her scheduled arrival, there was no trace of the yacht or anyone aboard. But then, out of the blue, the captain of another boat stumbled upon the wreckage bobbing in the water. As they ventured onto the abandoned vessel, they stumbled upon even more puzzling discoveries. What on earth happened to this boat, causing it to be half submerged and drifting aimlessly? Where did the entire crew and passengers vanish to? And the weirdest part, what happened to all that cargo? Why didn't anyone send out a distress signal? And why were there bloodstained bandages lying all around the ship? The more investigators delved into this strange event, the more questions surfaced. Was it the handiwork of pirates who plundered the cargo and dispatched the crew? Or could it be something more paranormal? Let's find out. The MV Joyita had already clocked in 2.5 decades of seafaring adventures before the infamous incident of October 1955. See, back in 1931, she set sail from Los Angeles, originally crafted as a private yacht. The brainchild of movie director Roland West, it was christened after his wife Jewel Carmen as Joyita, which translates to Little Jewel from Spanish. But little did anybody know, this luxury vessel was in for quite a ride. During her time, she stood tall as one of the finest yachts on the waves, capable of hauling cargo weighing up to 70 tons. And what set her apart was the robust hull crafted from specifically thick cedar oak, ensuring that she could weather any storm with ease. It seems like the MV Joyita spent its early years shuttling back and forth between Los Angeles and Mexico. Then, around the mid-1930s, there was a change in ownership and things took an interesting turn. The United States Navy took her under its wing in late 1941, just in time for the chaos surrounding Pearl Harbor. Yep, she was right there on duty during the attack and stuck around until the war's end. Now, here's where things get even more intriguing. In 1943, she ran aground, causing quite a bit of damage. But with the demand for every seaworthy vessel that they could get their hands on, repairs were swiftly underway. It was easier to repair the damage of this ship than just let it die. Once the dust settled after World War II, she changed hands again and found herself mainly hauling cargo. And she didn't just stick to her old ways. Significant upgrades were in store, including fancy new refrigerated cargo holds. By the mid-1950s, the Joyita had become a regular sight cruising the waters of the South Pacific. So, it's a little past 5 AM on the morning of October 3rd in 1955, and the MV Joyita set sail from Apia Harbour in Samoa. Its destination? The Tokalow Islands, and a quick 2-day journey ahead. On board, there are 25 souls in total, 16 crew members and another 9 passengers. Plus, the cargo hold is loaded with medical supplies, various food items, and about 80 empty oil drums. The trip's already off to a rocky start with a nearly 24-hour delay due to a pesky port engine clutch acting up just before the original departure time at noon the day prior. But hey, nothing's going to stop this boat. It sets off with just one engine chugging along. Fast forward now to 24 hours past the expected arrival time, and there's no sign of the Joyita. No distress signals, nothing. Cue the alarms. A report's sent out and a full-on search party spring into action. For nearly a full week they scour the seas, even getting a hand from the New Zealand Royal Air Force. Despite all this effort, there's zero. There's no ship, there's no crew, no cargo, not even a hint at wreckage. It's like she just vanished into thin air. Then, just over a month later, on November 10th, things take another turn. The crippled MV Joyita was stumbled upon by Captain Gerald Douglas of the merchant vessel Tuvalu. She was a whopping 600 miles off course from where she should have been. Despite being partially submerged, she was somehow still afloat. There's no sight of crew or passengers anywhere, and the cargo, well, that's all gone as well, without a trace. Since we know that the Joyita never made it to her final destination, there's no way that she offloaded her cargo on land somewhere and then turned back. Plus, with 25 people on board, someone would have popped up by now, right? And let's not forget, she was supposed to head back to Samoa loaded up with return cargo. So, here's where things get even more puzzling. When investigators finally reached the floating wreckage, they noticed something curious. See, the onboard radio was dialed to the International Marine Distress frequency, despite the fact that there was never any distress signals being received by anyone. It seemed like the crew was trying to send out an SOS of some sort. Also, the clocks aboard powered by the boat's electricity, well, they had all stopped dead at 10:25 PM. Pair that with the majority of the cabin lights being left on, and it points to something going down that night in the pitch dark. Among the eerie discoveries was a doctor's bag belonging to one of the passengers, who happened to be a well-known doctor at the time. What was inside the bag? Well, there was just a scalpel and some bloodstained bandages. As the investigators pieced together all the details, it started painting at least a partial picture of what might have happened to the boat. Now, even although the Joyita was still afloat and not in any immediate danger of going under, there was a whole lot of damage to take stock of. The superstructure itself took a real beating, with smashed windows and the flying bridge all banged up. They even found a makeshift shelter cobbled together from some wreckage materials. Down in the engine room, they found several mattresses set up like a makeshift fort. You know, the type of forts you would make as a kid. And it was covering up all of the equipment. Now, the boat was set with 3 life rafts and a spare rubber dinghy, but all of those were gone, again without a trace. Did the crew and passengers use them to bail? And if so, where did they end up? Did they make land somewhere and then just forget to send a postcard? It seems unlikely. Or did they meet a more gruesome fate, maybe sinking into the depths of the South Pacific? Here's where things get a wee bit more intriguing. Investigators couldn't help but notice that there was a significant barnacle growth on the exposed side of the yacht, and this growth was way higher than the usual waterline. So this led them to believe that the boat had been in that position for quite some time, likely since the second night of the journey when things started to take a turn for the worse. Despite the dire situation, there was still a good amount of fuel left in the Joyita's tanks. This led investigators to suspect that there might have been a leak in the engine room, hence all the mattresses that were stacked up there. They reckon this leak likely started around 9 PM on that fateful second night, about 90 minutes before the clock stopped ticking. When they started towing the yacht back to port, they discovered the culprit: a leak in the engine's cooling system. Investigators believed that the leak likely caught the crew off guard. Imagine, they're going about their business when suddenly water starts flooding in. By the time they realised what was happening, the affected room would have been swamped with water, making it nearly impossible to figure out where the leak actually came from. When they returned to port and delved deeper into this incident, things got even more strange. I mean, why did the crew and passengers abandon ship like that? Sure, the boat was pretty banged up, right? But it probably could have stayed afloat for a wee while longer. Turns out, the refrigerated cargo hold had some upgrades. For example, there was a hefty cork lining that was recently installed. So according to the investigators, that made the boat almost unsinkable. Now, the passengers might not have known about this nifty new feature, right? But you can bet your bottom dollar that the crew, especially the captain, they were well aware of this. So do you think that their best shot at making it out alive would have been to stick it out on the boat until help arrived? Nope. They just decided to ditch the ship, leaving investigators scratching their heads. Something fishy had to be going on here. And, well, as you might expect, we have a few theories to get through. Now, according to the initial findings, Captain Thomas Miller bore the brunt of the blame for this whole ordeal. Not only did they say that he shouldn't have set sail with just one engine working, but they also called out a bunch of other slip-ups, like having shoddy lifeboats and a radio that was on the fritz. Funnily enough though, they traced the leak back to a busted cooling pipe in the engine room. that little pipe ended up causing all that flooding and nearly sinking the Joyita. So, like I said, we've got many theories swirling around about what actually went down on that supposed cursed second night of the journey. Some of them are pretty sensible, you know, the level-headed kind, but others, well, let's just say they're out there. Could it be that the crew and passengers were snatched up by aliens, or sucked into some kind of Bermuda Triangle? Could it be that the crew and passengers were snatched up by aliens, or sucked into some kind of Bermuda Triangle-esque type anomaly, only to resurface 6 days later? But wait, how do we explain then the missing folks and the cargo? Are they just chilling somewhere in maybe an alternate dimension? Who knows? Maybe one day we'll stumble upon some evidence that backs up these wild scenarios. But hey, let's not discount the more down-to-earth explanations just yet. Back in the day, several newspapers were buzzing with a chilling theory about the Joyita and her crew. According to these newspaper reports, Japanese fishermen, possibly up to some shady business, were said to have attacked the Joyita after being spotted. Some even went as far as suggesting that they might have wiped out everyone on board. But again, hold on, there wasn't any concrete evidence to back up any of these claims, except for one newspaper, the Fiji Times and Herald, which boasted about having a rock-solid source confess to the whole ordeal. Of course, this source was anonymous. Then there's the Daily Telegraph, throwing another twist into the mix. They spun a tale about the Joyita crossing paths with Japanese soldiers, who were still living in a World War II time warp. They even floated the idea that the crew and passengers might still be kicking it in some secret Japanese base on a remote island somewhere. I mean, as far-fetched as that all sounds, there are a startling number of cases of Japanese soldiers being discovered in remote areas long after the war ended, and they needed crazy amounts of convincing that the war was over. But let's face it, despite all of the juicy gossip, there wasn't a shred of evidence to support any of these theories. And it's not just the poor Japanese getting the blame here. Some researchers decided to point the finger at the Cold War and throw the Soviet Union under the bus. According to these theories, they swooped in and snatched up all the passengers and crew, stuffing them into a submarine like some Cold War spy thriller. Then there's the pirate angle. A ragtag bunch of seafaring bandits stumble upon the Joyita and see it as their lucky day. They board the yacht, guns blazing, and make off with whatever loot they can get their hands on. Who knows? Maybe they even made off with the passengers' cash and bling before making them walk the plank. But here's the thing, since the passengers and crew were never actually found, we'll never know for sure if they were stripped of their valuables before meeting their untimely demise. Now, here's a theory that's a tad less morbid, but still raises some eyebrows. Some folks speculated that the whole Joyita debacle was nothing more than a sneaky insurance scam. The idea? Well, Captain Miller, drowning in debt, saw a sinking ship as his ticket to financial freedom. But hey, things didn't quite go as planned, did they? Instead of cashing in, everyone ended up vanishing into thin air. But hold the phone, because upon closer examination, it seems like those theories might have missed the mark by a long shot. See, Captain Miller, well, he could have raked in way more cash from the trips that he had lined up after the doomed voyage. Being the captain of the Joyita during that time would have netted him way more cash than any insurance payout. Netted. Get it? Let's talk about Captain Miller for a second then, shall we? This guy's quite the character. We already know that he took off on that final voyage with the boat that was basically held together with duct tape, not to mention against all common sense. But despite his questionable decision making, Miller should have known that there was no need to abandon the ship. So if that is indeed what happened, then why? Well, investigators started wondering if something happened to the captain himself. Maybe he got hurt, or worse, maybe he died somehow. If he wasn't around when the water started pouring in, it is possible that the passengers and crew freaked out and bailed for no good reason. But then, where would the captain's body be? Here's another thing, remember those bloodstained bandages? Yeah, those got a lot of people talking. Some folks reckon they were used to patch up an injured Captain Miller. A fellow ship captain even chimed in, swearing up and down that Miller wouldn't have ditched that boat willingly. Which brings us to the next theory. Mutiny.
Sure. Look at me, sure. I'm the captain now.
Whether Captain Miller was a beloved leader or not is up for debate. But here's where things get interesting, right? Some whispers suggest there might have been a mutiny brewing among the crew, either before or after they found water flooding into the Joyita. Now let's talk about Robin Mom. This guy drove headfirst into the Joyita saga and spilled all the details in his book The Joyita Mystery. According to Mom, when they realised that the boat was taking on water, they hauled the mattresses down into the engine room. Now, why on earth would they do that? Well, maybe they were trying to plug up the leaks to save the electrical gear. Captain Miller's deep understanding of the Joyita's capabilities could have been the spark that ignited a mutiny rumour. See, he knew damn well that the Joyita was practically unsinkable, and since he was counting on the money from this trip and future endeavours, Miller probably insisted that they push on, especially considering that they were supposedly only 50 miles away from their destination when the leak actually sprung. Now, imagine the scene. Miller giving the order to keep going despite the crew's objections. Maybe things got heated. Maybe there was even a scuffle, and that's when Miller might have got hurt, if he did indeed get hurt. Meanwhile, the boat's slowing down, eventually grinding to a halt, and when the engine cuts out, poof, the lights go out as well. Just like that, everything goes dark, right around 10:25 PM, if we're keeping track. So let's take a wee moment and put ourselves in their shoes, shall we? We're out there on the water. Everything's going south, and suddenly darkness. Panic sets in, confusion reigns supreme. In that moment, with adrenaline pumping and fear gripping your heart, it's no wonder that they made some pretty drastic, albeit not so smart moves. I want to skip back just a wee bit and talk about Robert Mom again. He actually bought the wreckage of the Joyita in the early 60s, as the mystery gripped him. Like I said before, he wrote a whole book about the entire ordeal, but he also kept a bunch of extensive, detailed diaries. I mean, not just about the Joyita, about his life as well. He was somewhat of a war hero. According to Wikipedia, he had saved the lives of some 40 men during his time in a tank regiment. But again, according to Wikipedia, his diaries mysteriously vanished upon his death in 1981. Which, by the way, is strange in of itself, because although his death was ruled as pulmonary embolism, that was not the official cause, because, and I quote, his body was apparently lost for 48 hours after his death. Now, I'm not saying that any of that is related, but it's definitely weird, right? So here's the million-dollar question. If they did indeed abandon that ship, where did they all go? And what the heck happened to them and all the cargo? Did their fragile escape boats get swallowed up by the waves and disappear into the abyss? And what about the cargo? It's hard to imagine that they lugged all that stuff with them. Maybe they chucked it overboard to try and lighten the load and keep the yacht afloat. But if that's the case, then surely there would be some sign of something just floating around. It was ultimately theorised that the crew and the passengers simply drifted and drifted, possibly to much stronger and deadlier waters. One theory was that they attempted to reach one of the nearby islands, but were... As perhaps likely as this scenario is, it still does not explain why no trace of at least one of the bodies or the escape boats was ever discovered. Even if that theory holds water, pun intended, why hasn't a single trace of them or their escape rafts ever turned up? It's perhaps worth mentioning that there's been apparent sightings of Captain Miller in Singapore and in Honolulu in the years following this incident. However, again, there appears to be no solid evidence that this mystery person was actually the missing captain. You know, when you look at the later chapters of the Joyita's story, it's hard not to wonder if the ship was actually cursed from the get-go. In the summer of 1956, some brave guy from the Fiji Islands decided that he was going to take on this challenge of fixing up the Joyita and get her back into seafaring shape. But just when things seemed to be looking up for him, legal troubles hit. It seems like there was some sort of big fuss over the official registration location of the ship, which had been moved from the US to Great Britain. Things didn't seem to improve once the Joyita took the waters once again. In January of 1957, for example, with 13 passengers on board, she would run aground while in the Karo Sea. An extensive repair programme got underway yet again, and by the following year, she was performing merchant missions between the islands of Fiji. For a wee while, it seemed like everything was going smoothly for these missions, until November of 1959 that was, when things took a turn near a reef, and the boat ran aground once again. Luckily, the high tide eventually freed the boat from this reef, but shortly after that, it started to take on water. To add to this drama, when the crew tried to pump out the water, they realised that the pumps had been installed incorrectly and were actually making the situation worse. After making it safely to shore, the crew basically left the damaged boat on Levuka Beach. Robin Mom, as I mentioned earlier, he ended up buying the vessel in the early 1960s for his research purposes before eventually selling it off a few years later. Despite ideas to turn it into a tourist attraction with refreshments and a small museum, it still remained abandoned. So, what really happened that fateful night back in October of 1955? What happened to the 25 passengers and crew? Was it simply a freak accident worsened by Captain Miller's negligence? Or could there have been a mutiny sparked by this negligence? Again, if a mutiny did occur, then why wasn't any passenger or crew member ever found afterwards? Could it be that all of them, along with the escape vessels, sank to the bottom of the South Pacific? You'd think there would have been at least some wreckage or one body discovered. It's these uncertain and speculative areas that leave this case officially open, leaving us to wonder what truly transpired that night. Could it be that the explanation veers into the realm of paranormal? Perhaps everyone on board witnessed something otherworldly that not only astonished and terrified them, but also somehow removed them from the boat entirely. It's a possibility, albeit a far-fetched one. And I know most of you that watch this channel will be surprised that I'm not leaning more heavily into the whole portal, dimension, alien abduction scenario. Something definitely happened that night, and whatever it was, it led to the vanishing of 25 people along with all of the cargo on board at that time. It's pretty much certain that everyone on board perished, probably within days if not hours of the actual incident. However, what exactly transpired during those days or hours will likely stay a mystery for the foreseeable future. While we have a pretty solid grasp of the fascinating yet grim events that unfolded in the South Pacific that night, the small sliver of uncertainty keeps researchers intrigued by this case. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with me today, folks. Stay safe out there, tell someone that you love them, and remember, no matter what life throws at you, keep smiling.